cast your minds back to the year 2008, a little movie called Iron Man came out. And of course, because this was the early 2000s, this of course got a tie-in video game. Now, Sega actually had a deal with Marvel to publish tie-in games for the early days of the MCU, so there's actually a tie-in game for the first two Iron Mans, the Incredible Hulk, as well as the first Thor and Captain America. None of them are exactly good, but they're not all terrible. And today we are looking at the Iron Man games for the Nintendo DS, so that is Iron Man 1 and 2. So without further ado, let's jump into the first Iron Man game. So Iron Man released on the Nintendo DS and all other platforms at the time in May 2008, pretty much at the same time as the film. The home console version was developed by Secret Level Inc., but the DS version we are looking at today was developed by Artificial Mind and Movement, who would later go on to become Behaviour Interactive, who are most well known for Dead by Daylight. Okay, so Iron Man for the DS, in the most simplistic terms, is a top-down shooter. And you know what? It's all the better for it. The game features the voice of Robert Downey Jr. and a pretty cool orchestral score to go along with it. So this doesn't feel like it's just some shovelware they've shoved out with the film really quickly. It does feel like some effort has been put in here to make this game work on the DS system, because obviously the DS was never going to be capable of running the home console version. So the vast majority of the game takes place with Iron Man in flight, just shooting enemies and dodging around. There are some small sections, like at the start when you break out the cave in the old Iron Man suit, that you are on foot. These on foot sections play fine enough. It's a bit awkward. You control Iron Man using the D-pad, and then you can use melee combat using the A, B, Y and X buttons, literally all four of them, and then you can use your flamethrower using the touchscreen. So it's kind of awkward to change between melee and touchpad because you have the stylus in your hand. The camera in these sections, I have to say, is a little bit awkward. It only really needs to follow you around when you're moving in tunnels between bigger rooms, and once it's in the room, it's just fixed really in one place. But in between these sections, it is really awkward moving about, because sometimes the camera will just flick because it's scripted to at the exact point you're stood, but you're trying to fight an enemy that's right in that line of adjustment. It's quite awkward. Anyway, so then we have the flying segments, which pretty much take up the bulk of the game. So in these flying sections, Iron Man has no melee capability whatsoever, which is a bit weird because you could easily fly up to the helicopter, punch through it or something like that, but the game just doesn't allow you to do so. So by tapping the touchscreen and holding it in different directions, this is your standard repulsor blast. What I don't like is the repulsor blast in this game sounds nothing like it does in the film, that iconic sound that just goes. Instead, it is just replaced with some really generic, irritating sound that does get a bit old quite quickly. Now, on top of the repulsors, you also have a couple of other methods of attack. You have an EMP blast that temporarily disables enemies around you. That is linked to all four of the buttons on the right hand side of the DS, so A, B, X and Y. I mean, I suppose it's quite a simple way to remember that is the EMP, but I'm certain they could have done more with the button layout than just put four of the main buttons on the console for the same command. I'm not sure if that's just me, but it seems a little bit lazy. Anyway, because of this, the same problem arises as it does with the melee combat, is that you have the stylus in your right hand, but then you have to quickly switch to the buttons at the same time. As well as these two things, in flight you also have a missile lock-on system that you can use. In the bottom right hand side of the touchscreen, you tap and it locks onto enemies, and once you let go, it will fire the missiles. And on top of this, you have the uni-beam that comes from the arc reactor core of Iron Man's chest, and that is in the bottom left of the screen. And honestly, it's very cool when you get to use it, but it's very hard to control. It always feels very awkward, and every time I used it, I ended up facing the wrong way. But maybe that's just a skill issue from my end. Anyway, once you have got to grips with these different combat mechanics, flying about, blasting enemies, completing objectives, I'm not gonna lie, it's actually a lot of fun. It's a simple concept that's been done fairly well. I'm probably a little biased based on my love for the IP it's based on, but I think this is a fairly solid game. It is not without issue, however. So the biggest issue, especially with these flying sections in this game, is the camera. The camera in these sections is locked in such a way that enemies can sneak up at you on any times in what feels very cheap and very unfair. There's no warning system in place when a helicopter sneaks up behind you and blasts you, and there's no minimap radar that shows the enemies, it only shows your objectives. So, had the camera have just been slightly less zoomed in, you could have had a very, very good game here, but it really does hinder the overall fun I had with this game. There's nothing more irritating than getting died to some cheap trick the game throws at you because you couldn't see what was coming. But it's not like you had any chance to see what was coming because the game doesn't let you. In between levels, the game offers you a pretty nice upgrade system that allows you to upgrade your health, the speed and power of your repulsor blast, the length of your EMP blast, stuff like that, and that's what you earn from completing levels and destroying more enemies. I'm not gonna lie, I just poured all of my upgrades into the standard repulsors and the health because I just got so annoyed about getting hit by stuff outside of the screen, but overall a pretty cool addition to the game. There is also a one-man army mode that lets you take on wave after wave of enemies instead of just being a story-driven experience. Speaking of story, there is a story here that does loosely follow the events of the film. It starts with you breaking out the cave in the Mark I armor, and it ends with Stain trying to take over the company and kill you as the Ironmonger. A lot of the stuff that happens in between definitely took some creative liberties, but that's okay. It's still a good time, and we've got Robert Downey Jr. Anyway, so across the board, the Iron Man game got absolutely review bombed by critics. They did not like the home console version of this game at all, with an average of about 40 to 45 out of 100 depending on what platform you were playing on. In fact, on Metacritic, the DS version is the only version of Iron Man the game to pull itself out of the generally unfavourable category. This one has a very nice 56 out of 100, putting it in the mixed to average realm, which, you know, still isn't great, but this game does have some good things going for it. Okay, and for our second Iron Man game on the DS, it is aptly titled Iron Man 2. The 360 and PS3 version of this game was actually developed by Sega themselves at Sega Studios San Francisco, but the DS version was actually developed by our friends over at Kryptonite Games, who you may recognise for developing the Nintendo DS ports of Spider-Man Web of Shadows and Shattered Dimensions, which we looked at in my Spider-Man video the other week, which if you haven't seen yet, go and check it out after this video. Now, before we talk any further about Iron Man 2, if you're a fan of movie tie-in games, superhero games, DS games, then this channel will be perfect for you, so why not hit that subscribe button, tap that bell for notifications, and I will love you 3000. Anyway, Iron Man 2 is actually a movie tie-in game that takes place after the events of the film. And no, it's definitely not canon to the MCU. Anyway, this game pits you up against the Roxxon Corporation and eventually the Crimson Dynamo, a character who is yet to make his MCU debut. Now, Iron Man 2 does away with the top-down shooter experience of the first game, and goes for something kind of similar to the Web of Shadows and Shattered Dimensions gameplay. Not exactly the same, of course, because these are two completely different characters, but some of the foundations are there. The gameplay style here is a side-scrolling beat-em-up with a little bit of exploration and a little bit of platforming, but because Iron Man can fly around, the platforming is very minimal. The game, much like its home console counterpart, allows you to play as both Iron Man and War Machine, and on the DS they both have a very varied control scheme. Iron Man is the bit more standard. You use the D-pad to control him and fly about, and the buttons to attack and then to initiate the flying sequence. War Machine, on the other hand, is a bit clunkier, a bit slower, but you control the weapons that he uses with the touchscreen instead. And initially I thought, oh, I'm not going to enjoy playing as War Machine, but it's a nice break in the gameplay experience from playing as Iron Man, where it feels a bit slower paced, but still a lot of fun. For a movie tie-in game, there is actually quite a lot of depth here. There's armor customization, upgrades, collectibles, there's a hub section, not a hub world, it's just your lab, but that you go to in between levels. You can talk to other characters to progress the story in between levels and talk to them afterwards to see what's changed now that you've completed that section. It's actually really cool, I'm not gonna lie. Now, once you actually get into the meat of the game, the combat can be a little clunky. I spent a lot more time playing as Iron Man because I was enjoying not having to use the touchscreen, and there were quite a few moments where there would be way too many enemies on screen, the frame rate would dip a little, and then on top of that, I was just getting hit by missiles left, right and centre, and it's very hard to counteract that. Again, this was definitely a skill issue on my half, because I did eventually get a bit more used to this, but at first it is quite daunting, and you can get killed quite easily. However, when you do die, it's not game over, you don't go back to a checkpoint, instead you have a little mini game. You just have to get the arc reactor back online by aligning all the layers of it so the electrical current can run through. Which is great, it means that there's no major penalty for dying. Yes, you obviously don't want to die in your levels, but it kind of takes away that pressure and stress that you would have otherwise. In terms of graphics, this game looks absolutely fine, there's nothing wrong with it, this is a DS era movie tie-in game. It certainly looks better than its predecessor, but it's just serviceable. There's nothing really fantastic about its looks, but there's nothing particularly bad about them either. This time around, there's no spoken dialogue, so everything you get in the game is all through text on your screen. Sometimes there is quite a lot of this, and I just wanted to get through the game and play. Sometimes it throws way too much dialogue at you in the level as well, in between walking in rooms. It doesn't exactly ruin the gameplay experience, don't get me wrong, but sometimes it does grind down to a halt. Especially after you've just defeated a big load of enemies, you're getting ready to go on, and then suddenly you've just got Tony Stark yapping for 5 minutes, delivering really classic cringe MCU one-liners, and you just want to tap through it so you can get back to the game. Overall though, Iron Man 2 for the DS is a pretty good time. It's a fairly serviceable, standard game, but honestly, I think that's what it needed. At least it doesn't have that reputation of being the worst movie tie-in game or anything like that. It's just a pretty decent DS game that you could pass a few hours playing, and then you'll probably forget about it in a week or so. But that's fine, that's what it's there for. In terms of critical response, on Metacritic, the DS version of this game scored just 2 less than its predecessor with a 54 out of 100. Personally, I think this should be a little bit higher, around the 60 to, well, 65 mark, I would say. No higher than that, but it's certainly better than the previous game, in my opinion. Much like the previous game, the home console versions of Iron Man 2 all scored around 40 to 45, so just not good again. Anyway, that takes us to the end of our look at both Iron Man games for the DS. What do you guys think of these games? Have you played them? Do you look back on them fondly? I'd love to know. And if there's other DS games or superhero games or whatever games you want to see, let me know in the comments down below. And as always, thank you very much for watching. Please don't forget to leave a like if you enjoyed the video and subscribe. I will see you in the next video. Bye bye.